Hello, I'm Annie Graham Larkin, Executive Director of the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum. Welcome to Art in a Mining Camp, Effie Anderson Smith and the Pioneering Women, Artists of Southern Arizona with Stephen Carlson. Thank you to our members and donors who enable the museum to provide free online programming and fulfill the organization's mission to discover history, explore Bisbee's past today. To learn how you can assist the museum in supporting its mission and programs by becoming a member or donor, please visit bisbeemuseum.org. This year, the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum has designated June to invite Bisbee and Naco residents to visit the museum free of charge. Simply flash your driver's license showing your residency to experience the fun of discovering history at the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum. The museum is open every day from 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. And during your visit, you'll have the opportunity to view Impressions of the Desert, the art of Effie Anderson Smith, a sampling of oil paintings by Arizona's earliest female desert landscape impressionist. This exhibit highlights E.A. Smith's restrained brilliance in coloring and an individual technique that were her unique contributions to desert art and the foundation for Arizona Impressionism. All right, I'd like to introduce our speaker now. Stephen Carlson is an art and music historian based in California. A graduate of the University of San Francisco and UC Irvine, Stephen's career has mainly been as a classical music radio presenter and manager at commercial and public radio stations. After several decades on the air and online telling the stories of renowned musicians and composers, Stephen realized there was a historically important artist in the family whose story had not been told and was largely forgotten by the art world. Stephen set out to reconstruct the narrative and revive the interest in Effie Anderson Smith's timeless desert art, which embodies the Arizona experience. And if you would like to ask questions during the program today, please type your question in the Q&A chat box, and we'll gather those to share with our speaker. And also a link to the program recording will be sent to all of our Zoom registrants later today. And with that, I'd like to welcome Stephen Carlson. Thank you for joining us today, Stephen.
Thank you, Annie. I'm pleased to be here, and thank you so much for making it possible for us to bring Effie Anderson Smith's art and story back home to Cochise County and to be at the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum for this wonderful exhibit, which will be the longest exhibit in our history. And it's going to be a rotating, actually it already is kind of a rotating exhibit, and we'll show you some pictures of that in just a moment. When I give presentations on Effie Anderson Smith, I usually try to cover as much of her life as we can get into, but today our topic is art in a mining camp. So I'm going to cover the essential elements of Effie's inspiring life story, take a look at her art, and weave in the stories of her friendships and mentorship of a circle of women artists that formed around her in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. Prior to that, she was, to a great degree, making art sporadically with the little free time she had to herself while she was teaching school and later in married life trying to raise a family and attend to all the civic involvement she was engaged in. The Commonwealth mine, which her husband Andrew Young Smith managed, also took a lot of her time, as her home was also referred to by everyone connected as mine manager's house, with the daily flow of people in and out when the mine was active and all the interruptions that came with that. This is Effie in the front yard of her home in Pierce, with the garden to our right and the slope of the Commonwealth Mine Hill in the background. So this is where we could go directly into telling you all about Effie's artistic roots and the trajectory of her circle of women student artists. But first, for those of you who don't know Effie's story, it would be good to perhaps provide some context. Known publicly as Mrs. A.Y. Smith during her Arizona years, she has been referred to in Cochise County in recent decades as pioneer painter, as she was both a pioneer settler, coming to the Arizona Territory as a young bride in 1895, already active as an artist in her native Arkansas, from her teen years and later in New Mexico for a brief period before she eventually settled in the mining camp of Pierce at age 27. For those of you who have not yet been to Bisbee, our current exhibit entitled Impressions of the Desert is installed gallery style in the beautifully paneled historic Phelps Dodge Mining Headquarters building, home of today's Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum, right in the heart of Old Bisbee. 21 paintings are on view, many from our Effie Anderson Smith Museum collection, and some loaned to us for this show. And also this recent discovery at the Bisbee Mining Museum itself, given to the museum in the 1980s. This painting has recently been rediscovered and restored. Also in nearby Douglas, where Effie lived the last productive decade of her life as an artist, as an active artist from about 1941 to 1950, the Douglas Williams House, built in 1909, has hosted several of Effie Anderson Smith's exhibits that we've put on as the Effie Anderson Smith Museum and Archive in the last 15 years in coordination with the Douglas Historical Society. Among the displays here is the only permanent exhibit of Effie's paintings anywhere. This photographic chronology of Effie shows Miss Effie Anderson at about age 21 in Arkansas, where she was born and educated. The 1895 photo is from around the time of her Bisbee wedding to Andrew Young Smith. Then a 1929 studio photo taken in Tucson by Albert Buman, the year of Effie's 60th birthday. And finally, from 1949, the year of her last major exhibit in Douglas, when the community brought together as many paintings of Effie's as they could find for a display at the Douglas Chamber of Commerce as a celebration of Effie's 80th birthday. The Buman photo was included in a feature article profiling Effie in the November 1929 issue of the magazine Progressive Arizona and the Great Southwest. The cover included one of Effie's paintings entitled Arizona After the Rain. Photographer Alfred Buman's father, Henry Buman, had documented the vanishing frontier in photos during the early 19th century. Effie was doing something similar, but on canvas with oil paints, as she traveled, sketched, and painted in nearly every corner of Arizona. For Effie and other desert painters of the early 20th century, the West came to exemplify both an imagined and observed vocabulary of what makes up the American frontier: geology, drama, isolation, and spiritual rejuvenation. Effie's paintings can be categorized as landscapes and also exclusively as desert paintings, since the majority of her works that survive are scenes from Arizona's deserts, canyons, and mountains. In the tradition of desert painters, Effie's canvases present vast open vistas interrupted only occasionally by the stray scrub or tree. Both the romantic approach to landscape painting and the more austere insist upon the capacity of the land to engage us spiritually. As a result, attention is focused on the sculptural qualities of the geology and overwhelmingly on what is not there. Especially with desert painters, we are encouraged, as they did, to allow our minds and spirits to roam the emptiness and search for meaning. Such images permit us to engage with the power of pure natural creation in its starkest, sparest form, without the distractions of lush vegetation or the disruptions imposed by human intervention. All of these paintings are vistas Effie could easily get to within a few miles of her home of 45 years in Pierce. Effie was most acclaimed for her impressions of the Grand Canyon, vistas sketched and painted at the main viewpoints and trailheads along the south rim of the Grand Canyon. But before Effie's long love affair with Arizona began, when she came here as a pioneer settler in 1895, she would start life and her artistic development in a very different place. Effie was a Southerner by birth and a Westerner by adoption, so to speak. She was born and started life during the years of Reconstruction, at a time of the economic and social instability following the Civil War. Although she lived the first 25 years of her life in Arkansas, when she began her new life in the New Mexico Territory as a school teacher in 1894, and then came to Arizona as a young bride in 1895. She almost never spoke of her early years that formed her character, worldview, and life goals. It was in Arkansas where her two great life passions took root, painting and teaching, and where her faith and perseverance were first tested, infusing her with a resilient and independent spirit. Effie's parents were married not long after her father, Adolphus Anderson, came to Arkansas from South Carolina, probably for the purpose of acquiring land for farming. He purchased about 1,600 acres just before the outbreak of the Civil War. Effie's mother, Martha Adelia Coulter, known as Adelia, was from a family of farmers and planters who had settled in the Red River Valley area of southwest Arkansas in the 1830s. Adelia and Dolph were well educated for their generation. Her father studied surveying in Virginia, and in addition to farming, he was active as a civil engineer, and for a time, in the years following the Civil War, was involved in an antimony mine in Arkansas. This is where Effie's parents were married in March of 1861. It was the home of Effie's grandparents, William and Martha Coulter, a mile south of what is today the town of Nashville, Arkansas. And it is also likely where Effie was born on September 29, 1869. Education seems to have been important to Effie's family. Her maternal grandfather and her father had both been involved as trustees in establishing some of the early colleges and schools in southwest Arkansas. Even though Effie was showing talent as a budding artist at an early age, life as an artist for a young woman was not considered a proper profession. For Effie, teaching, at least initially, seemed the best avenue to some form of independence. This is a view of the Ouachita River from DeSoto Bluff, just outside of Arkadelphia, Arkansas. If you were a young artist, perhaps set up with your canvas and paints along the shoreline in the distance, looking in this direction, could the resulting painting look something like this? Here we have the earliest surviving painting by Effie, perhaps a study rather than the actual place I just showed you. Painted as Effie approached her 15th birthday, it displays her attempt to emulate paintings she had probably seen. The feathery trees and shrubs, her attempt to capture a grand mountainous landscape with other mountains in the distance, a pastoral scene with some dramatic elements, are reminiscent of the Hudson River style of American art. And the color palette she would later use to great effect in Arizona is already established, including the Impressionist's base color of violet. As Effie was finishing high school in 1888 and attending Hope Female Institute the following 2 years, she seems to have become acquainted with a young man named Willie, William Mark Spencer. 2 years older than Effie, Willie worked in sales and accounting for a prominent retailer in Hope. As Effie turned 21 in September of 1890, romance had blossomed, and Effie agreed to marry Willie on December 17th. As fate would have it, Effie's Christmas wedding was followed by a springtime funeral. Willie died of tuberculosis on March 21st, 1891, a bit more than 3 months after their wedding, leaving the 21-year-old Miss Effie Spencer a widow. Following newspaper reports of Willie and his family while he was looking through, I would say, newspaper reports of Willie and his family while he was growing up in the nearby town of Arkadelphia. Willie was frequently mentioned for his youthful social activities and achievements in school, but also for his many illnesses. In fact, during the coming years, 2 of Willie's other siblings would succumb to tuberculosis. After Willie's death in March of 1891, Effie spent much of the summer with his family in Arkadelphia at the hotel they operated, and for 3 weeks dutifully visited Willie's extended family in Tennessee, even though she was now his widow. But by fall, she had returned to teaching, and over the next 2 years, she taught in the schools of Hope and Nashville. It resulted in an opportunity to travel to one of the earliest teachers' training conferences in the South at Atlanta, and then something of a grand tour by train through the Northeast followed. At the time Effie traveled to New York in 1892, the first exhibits of French Impressionist paintings to be seen in America were being shown and displayed and were finally being embraced by the critics and public. In the 20 years since the painting on the left was completed in 1872 and rejected by the Academy in Paris, most academics and critics derided this new kind of painting. These are paintings by Claude Monet, and when his harbor scene entitled Impression Sunrise was first shown in Paris, the art establishment and critics were appalled and declared that this could not possibly be a finished painting. In the years to come, Monet and others eventually saw their art increasingly accepted. Monet's variations on these haystacks made him a lot of money. What does repetition in art afford the artist? You could say it's nuance. In Effie's case, her paintings also tend to repeat in subject, but are never identical. Different seasons, times of day, different clouds, yuccas in bloom here, or not so much in bloom, even dry and fizzled, or at some point in between. This is also something the Impressionists were doing, landscapes that focus the eye on a specific focal point or portion of a scene, not the entire view of Cochise Stronghold here, a somewhat clipped view. Monet also explored nuances of light and color with the facade of the cathedral at Rouen. 29 views of it here, and it's rare that all of these are assembled in any one place. Usually you only get to see a few of them. Effie's cathedral, in her case, first and foremost, was Cochise Stronghold, which she could see from the windows of her home in Pierce. And by the 1930s, she'd already painted it at least 14 times, according to newspaper accounts, and many more times after that. She took this same approach with views of the Sulphur Springs Valley from the Chiricahua Mountains, later at Cave Creek Canyon in the Chiricahuas, and of course, more masterfully, the Grand Canyon, as we will see in a few minutes. Now, this is not to say that Effie Anderson Smith is as important as Monet, but just to indicate her creative output in desert paintings of Arizona was infused with some of the same approaches and techniques. This is art created in a mining camp. It's also Arizona Impressionism. She was a landscape painter for sure. She was a desert painter, and she was an impressionist. We can say that categorically about her. So just what is Impressionism? I have a few comments here about it. It's a movement of art that started in the 1870s in France, but wasn't embraced in America till about 1890. It rejected the rigid rules of the fine arts or Beaux-Arts. The Impressionist captures a momentary transient effect of sunlight by working quickly in the open air. And later on, some artists like Effie, even Monet, didn't do everything in the open air. They would take it back to the studio and finish it up. But early on, you might find some paintings of smaller ones of hers that were done completely outside within just a few minutes. Greater awareness of light and color, shifting patterns, brushwork is looser, fleeting qualities of light. These are different than the art of the past and most recent past. The artist's emotional reaction to the subject influences the color palette. But all of that was yet to come for Effie, who in 1892 had another very eye-opening trip in the offing. Her elder brother George had gone west to the New Mexico territory, probably to work in mining initially. In Deming, he met Mary Elizabeth Smith, no relation to Effie's future husband, A.Y. Smith. George and Mary Elizabeth were engaged to be married, and it seems likely Effie and other family came west for the wedding. The trip would have given Effie her first look at the dramatic mountainous landscapes and vast distances that were so different from the lush green woods and farmlands of southwest Arkansas. Back in Arkansas, Effie continued to teach school into 1893 when several more major life events occurred to upend her world. First, Effie's father died following a short illness in April. A few weeks later, in May, a devastating tornado ripped through southwest Arkansas and the town of Hope, leaving as many as half of the 10,000 residents of the surrounding areas either homeless or destitute. In between these two events, the financial panic of 1893 had begun on May 9th, which precipitated a 5-year economic depression across the country. The lives of Effie, her mother, and Effie's younger sister, Carrie, were about to change as brother George returned from New Mexico long enough to bring them all west to a new life. We know from the Deming newspapers that by the summer of 1894, Effie and her sister Carrie had left their teaching positions in the schools of Nashville and Hope, Arkansas, and were in Deming being introduced socially by their brother at various community and private gatherings. As a widow, Effie was now known as Mrs. Effie A. Spencer. And by the autumn of 1894, both Effie and her sister had secured teaching jobs in New Mexico. Effie's brother George was now working at the Deming train station, and one of his co workers there was a young Scottish immigrant, Andrew Young Smith, serving as a clerk and telegrapher. Our friend Amanda in Portland believes this was purchased by a member of her family in Bisbee around the year 1916, but it doesn't really look like an Arizona painting. Interestingly, the initials on it are EAS. It's one of the rare instances where Effie did not sign her entire name. And it could be because this was a painting from the transitional time from her being Effie A. Spencer to Effie Anderson Smith. But it's also in a frame that looks like some of the other ones from Effie's later paintings. So it might have ended up in this frame in Bisbee and gotten sold around 1916. It seems likely that Effie's brother George Anderson may have had a hand in introducing his widowed sister to Andrew. He had immigrated to the U.S. in 1881, lived in Missouri for much of the rest of his youth, and then trained as a stonecutter, which would give him the opportunity to move to Northern California in 1890 and be northeast of San Francisco, close to Napa, in an area where they were building courthouses and other stone buildings. And at that time, he had an opportunity to fill in for a railroad clerk at Cordelia Junction. It was a springboard to a subsequent position in Deming, working for the railroad in 1893, where he and Effie would soon meet in late 1894, and romance quickly blossomed. Andrew, or AY as he became known, then secured a railroad job at the train station down the line in Benson, Arizona in 1895, working there for both the Southern Pacific and Arizona Southern. Before he left Deming for Benson, he asked Effie to join him there in Arizona as his bride. Effie agreed, and on August 1st, 1895, Effie A. Spencer became Mrs. A.Y. Smith in a small but lively ceremony and celebration at the Bessemer Hotel in Bisbee. This image of the photo is a photograph by Oris Hunt, whose studio was in a Pullman Palace car of the San Francisco Railroad, and it appears the Smiths are possibly dressed in their wedding finery, though this may have been taken when Hunt's photography rail car made a stop at Benson, where AY worked sometime later. This is where the Smiths married at Bisbee's Bessemer Inn or Hotel on August 1st, 1895. It's a photo here from the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum collection. If you haven't looked on the website of the museum, there's an amazing array of photos and postcards that really capture the history of Bisbee and areas surrounding. Again, note the side porches here of the Bessemer house, which is off to the left there, and that's the Copper Queen, which this photo's from a couple of years after the Smith's wedding, but those porches always remind me of the side porches of the house that Effie's parents were married in. This is another view of the Bessemer house. It's in front of what is then a church, the Presbyterian church, which was built a few years later in 1900, but still gives you another view of the house where the Smiths married. And thanks again to the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum for loaning us those photos. Effie and the Smiths in Arizona and California at these locations, there was a period of time where they were in California because their son was unable to attend high school in Arizona along the border due to the Mexican Revolution going on and concerns about it spilling over. So after their year in Benson, they were in Pierce for quite a long time. AY actually died in 1931. Effie stayed on through the Depression for another decade, and then decided after Pearl Harbor that she would move to Douglas, which was the better place for her to be because there weren't going to be tires for your car or gasoline. And by that time, her one son who had gotten into mining, was living in Morenci at the pit up there and working, and so she would visit him periodically. And then the last few years of her life, she was at the Arizona Pioneers home in Prescott. The photo of this saloon in Pierce is from the collection of the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum. If you want to know and see what Pierce was like in its heyday, this is the book for you. By the time we get to the 1920s, some of these old saloons were out of business and had been turned into the Town and Country Club and a library or other less rowdy establishments. This sign says it all about Pierce history in brief, so to speak. Gold being discovered in 1895, various investors coming in, and Effie's husband, who had moved the family to Pierce by that point in 1896, not long after they really got production going there. Lived in Pierce for many years, and though the mine kind of had its day by the early 19 teens, and then things were on and off until things eventually ended around the late 1930s into the 40s. After about a year working for the railroad in Benson, AY parlayed his skills as a railroad clerk and bookkeeper and his knowledge of stone cutting into a position with more upward potential than that of being a railroad clerk. He applied for and landed a job as bookkeeper for one of Arizona's latest mining bonanzas, the Commonwealth Mine in Pierce, which the figures are all over the place, but it's generally acknowledged around $10 million of silver mostly and gold came out of that mine during its most active 15 years. This was in 1896, and it wasn't long before Effie followed to meet and live with A.Y. Smith in Pierce, where he had gotten involved. And the town was quickly mushrooming, becoming a very active mining camp. And a lot of people in Tombstone who wanted to be part of that, when things had long gone down in Tombstone, moved their houses across Middlemarch Pass and the Dragoon Mountains to Pierce, and left Tombstone and took up residence in Pierce, and that's when the population boomed to close to 2,000. Effie and AY had their first child in 1896 in Benson, but not long after that, Effie moved over to be with AY in Pierce, and unfortunately, it was pretty limited as far as sanitation, no running water, anything like that, water being brought in. And both Effie and her first son were ill, and he died 4 months after birth. They both were taken over to Tombstone, but he died. Effie survived, and the baby was buried in the Tombstone Cemetery. This is their second child, Uncle Lewis, who I knew as Uncle Lewis Anderson Smith. When I was growing up, he and his wife would come back to where I was growing up in New York to visit us, and then eventually in the 60s, we came out to visit them a couple of times in Tucson. Lewis was born in Los Angeles, though, because Effie didn't want to take any chances after the death of her first child. He grew up in the shadow of the Mine Hill in Pierce, graduated from Stanford and the University of Arizona, and did his master's on the Commonwealth Mine. You can find that paper online, and became a career geologist for Phelps Dodge and later the state of Arizona. These are just some scenes from life in Pierce. I heard a lot about this from Uncle Lewis. You can see them before they had a car. He's sitting on the back of a horse there with Effie and a buggy, and there's another friend in there. This was one of their earliest cars, not the first, but an early car. It's a 1906 or '07 Rambler. And then these other scenes are either off at Turkey Creek or Antelope Hills. And those women with the rifles, there was kind of a fad for getting photos like this taken of you or even Effie's children and neighbors' children with rifles like that. And those two women are Mrs. Swatling and Mrs. Brockman. They were the wives of mine investors. And this is the kind of the evolution of the Smiths house. Initially a territorial adobe, which they added a porch to, and later on that porch got screened in. And there's little Lewis on the porch with a saddle, and Effie with the wagon possibly going out to do some painting, and that's Uncle Lewis when he got bigger. So all of this was going on in the background, and Effie was doing some of her early paintings, which we don't have a lot of evidence of because her house burned down in 1929, but that's another story. This is an important man in the life of Effie as a artist in a mining camp. Count James Portales had come from Europe. His family was in the diplomatic world in France and in Austria and Russia. And he became an early investor in the mine after the initial investors, Penrose and Brockman, and those people bowed out. Portales came in and visited the mine, and while he was in the Smith's home, he asked, "Whose paintings are these on the wall? I don't recognize this artist." And of course, Uncle Andrew said, "No, that's my wife, Effie." And he said, "Well, you need to get her with someone who can really help her with her technique because she's got some real talent," something to that effect. And in fact, that's what happened over the years that Uncle Lewis went to school in Los Angeles for high school. That's when Effie started to connect with the California Impressionists. Before that, though, they had one more child, maybe kind of a surprise baby. This was Janet Annadel Smith, who was born in 1906. And unfortunately, though, she did not live beyond 7 months. And of course, it put both of the Smiths into a real depression, Effie especially. And she often talked about the great sorrow in her life. And we're pretty sure that that refers to Annadel, that propelled her to get back into her art. Lewis was older then, and she didn't have to watch him quite as closely. But we think that this undated painting, which is at the Douglas Historical Society, which depicts the mine hill in Pierce, called Rainstorm or Rain Over Pierce, may have been from that period of time, right around the baby's death, because we don't see any other paintings like this that are as dark, as moody as this. It's probably the closest thing Effie ever got to tonalism. Effie became very civically involved during the years she lived in Arizona. You can see some of the things she was involved here, either starting, founding, or being a member of. And that's probably the model of her parents, who were both very civically involved in Arkansas. I'd like to talk about the women now a little bit more, the women who influenced Effie's art, not necessarily in Arizona, but helped her become the better teacher. She'd already been a school teacher, but teaching art is something else. This is May Bradford Shockley, who was a photographer. She captured a lot of the early years in Tonopah, Nevada, which was a real boom town as well. She was the first female silver and gold assayer in the Nevada Territory, and she was a painter. She ended up marrying William Shockley, who was a world renowned geologist and probably was Lewis Anderson Smith's teacher at Stanford University in geology. They were neighbors of Herbert Hoover and family, and she was very connected with Mrs. Hoover. Uh, we see paintings here that are mostly botanicals and flowers and still life. And there's a very famous gift store in San Francisco called Gump's, and May Bradford sold her paintings through there, and she became quite well known. I don't see much evidence here of influence in Effie's art, other than we do see a lot of knowledge of how to use color. And if she taught Effie nothing else, it was probably a sense of color. This is Anna Althea Hills, who is one of the key figures in starting the whole Laguna Beach art colony. People from Pasadena in that art colony would come down, and also from Northern California, to paint along the coast. And you will see some scenes here, a couple of coastal scenes, and then the eucalyptus trees, which are kind of well known for California Impressionist artists. Many of these people came from Europe, but Anna was born in the United States, back in Ohio. You'll see some golden trees here, possibly sycamore trees that show up in Effie's art as well, and a sense of distance and coloration is much closer to Effie. These are some desert paintings, which Anna started doing, interestingly enough, in the years after she and Effie got to know each other, and Effie started studying with her about 1914. And the painting on the right is known as Montezuma's Needle, or something like that, Montezuma's, and then some other word, but needle, finger, something like that. This painting is very, you can see that scene if you're on Interstate 8 between Tucson and San Diego. If you go to a rest stop at the Mohawk Valley just before you get to the river, from Tucson going west, you will see this exact scene there. And this painting, not too long ago, sold for about $30,000. Stickney Memorial Art Institute in Pasadena was actually the Stickney sisters. One of them died, and the other one decided to turn their house, into an art school. And all these fellows from Europe, and even a few women teachers from the US, uh, gravitated there. And among them were Jean, or as he called himself in the US, Jean Mannheim. He was actually from Germany, the border region between Germany and France, and Richard Emil Miller, who spent a lot of time in Paris. Both of them made a lot of money as portrait painters, but this is Mannheim's home, kind of typical Germanic house. You have the name of the occupants in there. This is on the Arroyo Seco, overlooking the Arroyo in Pasadena. And these are some of his paintings. And he did portraits, that's his niece, and landscapes, to a great degree, landscapes. But here now he's out in the desert. This is near Palm Springs. And if you go along Interstate 10, the rail line is still there. Of course, they're not running steam these days, but you'll still see sand dunes along the rail tracks. And then here's a scene from Laguna Beach, and of course, some eucalyptus trees, which just about everybody among the California Impressionists, especially in southern Arizona, would paint at some point. Uh, there were poplar trees that Monet did, so it's the kind of the California version. But this landscape of the sea always interests me, the seascape, and you see the outcropping of the rocks, especially on the right there. And when you look at what Effie's got in her home here, there is a seascape in the middle of the paintings on top of that bookshelf, and you could almost perhaps go back to that place in Laguna Beach. We were there today, I could walk you down there, and I know exactly where that spot is. And it looks like Effie did some paintings of the sea, but we don't see any of those that have survived, because this house that she's standing in, and this is about somewhere about 1916, 17, 1920 at the latest. We know that because the clock behind her was not made before 1915. All of these paintings, all of her library, everything here, the Tiffany style dome lamp and all of that did not survive the fire that occurred in 1929. And only few things survived. Some silver items, that little tea caddy that's on the table there survived. I actually have that. It's um, one of the few items, but there were 55 paintings in that house, and unfortunately, they all perished at that time. There were 3 Grand Canyon paintings that were pulled out, and I will show those to you in a minute. We've already seen a couple of them. This is how I would describe Effie's development as an artist over her lifespan. In the 1880s in Arkansas, she was painting things that looked more or less like Hudson River School paintings. But by the time she was leaving New Mexico, coming into Arizona, in the early 1900s, she was painting more in impressionist style. And after her studies in Southern California, that made a difference for her. Her fully mature paintings, which we mostly know, are from the mid 1920s forward. And something happened in 1926. We're not quite sure what that was, but she either met or studied with somebody that was really able to help her move ahead in her technique. This is an undated painting. Interestingly enough, it was owned by Dr. William Sims and his wife Mary, who lived in Bisbee for a long time before he went on to serve in the Arizona State Legislature and became head of the Arizona State Senate. There is a Sims Road in Bisbee, and I think that's no accident. Here is a painting from 1926 that's in the Douglas Historical Society, and you see that Effie's technique is definitely ramped up here. There's a lot of nuance in the hills, and one of her best known paintings of Cochise Stronghold and the old yucca, which she referred to as a yucca that she made friends with right around the time she first came to the Sulphur Springs Valley in the mid 1890s. And here's an example from 1930. She was also in Arizona, in northern Arizona, quite a bit. And although some of her earlier paintings of the San Francisco peaks perished in her house fire in 1929, here's one from the early 1930s. This is one of the paintings that was pulled out of her house during the fire, a Grand Canyon painting which has 2 dates on it, oddly enough, 1928 and 1935. We believe this is the prototype for the high style paintings that she did, the larger ones. And we know that there are at least 22 Grand Canyon paintings that she did over a 30-year period. This is another view of Bright Angel Trail from the following year. Coloration is different, the sky is different, the afterglow is a little different. This again is a painting that was pulled out of the house 1928, looking east from Yavapai Point. It's from another viewpoint. The frame is a little different here. Most of her Grand Canyon paintings have the same frame on them, the large ones, but this might have gotten a little scorched. And then this is a painting of yet a different scene. We believe it's the unnamed temple, although the back of the frame says Lacey Point on it. It can't be Lacey Point because that's in the Painted Desert. But we believe this is one of several paintings. She had three that she favored most, and she called them her Grand Canyon Suite, a la Ferdie Groffet's great classical music piece. After the house burned in 1929, this is the house they built, rebuilt. The old little schoolhouse is still there. Eventually, that goes away, and there's a big gymnasium there. And then in 1912, you can just barely see part of another school building to the right. But this house with this gate was designed by Andrew Young Smith, and he really loved it. It's different than the wood frame house and stucco house that they had before that. We're grateful to the family, the Monthan family of Tucson, and for finding this photo and others in their family album and recognizing it as being Effie Anderson Smith and Andrew Young Smith. This is with Margaret Ray Tuttle, who is an aunt of the Monthans, who they called Aunt Meg. And here they are again out. And most of these buildings in the distance here are all gone. They were either taken apart or just disintegrated. With the painting and studies that Effie did in the 19 teens in California, she was probably ready to exhibit when she returned from her art studies in California in about 1917, but she had been called on to organize a Red Cross chapter in the northern Sulphur Springs Valley, and World War I began around that time. But of course, right after that, the Spanish flu pandemic, 1918 to 1920, began, and her art went on the back burner. But as the pandemic finally abated in 1920, she could get back to painting at the Grand Canyon and elsewhere around Arizona. So by 1921, she was ready for a show. And this is the Bisbee Women's Club, where on March 23rd, 1921, Effie had her first ever solo show in this clubhouse. She was an active member of the women's clubs. And thank you to the Sulphur Springs Valley Historical Society and Wilcox for allowing us to show this women's club yearbook. The women's club in Wilcox was her home club, and you see her here listed in the middle as the first name in the art department. She would become the art chairman of the Southern District of the Arizona Women's Clubs and present exhibits all over Arizona, especially at the women's clubs and schools around the state. Eventually, in 1931, she had exhibits in the East, Washington, Philadelphia, and New York. George Washington University was the host for one of those, the Corcoran Gallery as well. And then in Philadelphia and New York, we believe those were at women's clubs or possibly Phelps Dodge headquarters in New York, but we haven't been able to verify that yet. Speaking of art in a mining camp or in a smelter town, Mr. Beckett, P.G. Beckett, served as vice president of Phelps Dodge Corporation and general manager of the copper producers' Western operations. And in 1931, he knew that PD was merging with Calumet and Arizona Mining Company, and he wanted to preserve an image of the two smelters in Douglas. It operated, PD operated one smelter and CNA the other. PD's Copper Queen smelter in the foreground was scheduled for closure and dismantling. It's believed Mr. Beckett commissioned Effie to create this painting, a very unusual subject for her, depicting the Douglas smelters, which Effie completed in 1931. And coincidentally, that's right as her husband had passed away. We think it might have been a commission to help her get through the processing of all of those emotions with the loss of her beloved husband. Mr. Beckett also commissioned Effie to paint a series of views of his country cottage north of Douglas, which he gifted to prominent families in and around Douglas who he was close to. He used this for entertaining during the 1930s. He had a pool putting. It was used by people when he wasn't there. He didn't live there. He lived in town. But these are some rare cases where Effie painted buildings. And here we have a little photo of her from the mid-1930s living alone at the house in Pierce, her at the gate, and this ended up on a Christmas card that she sent out to people, and we found it in the papers of Edith Choate Young, one of her friends from Tucson, at the Historical Society, the Arizona Historical Society. This is a painting. Effie's first major exhibits were in Tucson in the early 1920s with the Tucson Fine Arts Association, later the Tucson Museum of Art, but they didn't have a building then. And it was there and in Bisbee and Douglas, but especially Tucson in the mid to late 20s where Effie had her first great successes. And this is a painting from the mid 1930s that Effie started to get very interested in the desert flora around her. This is a Sulphur Springs Valley below. That's Apache Pass. The Butterfield stage line ran through there in the old days, and the pioneers would go up over this pass because it wasn't as swampy and marshy as the route of Interstate 10 today during the monsoon season or after. It's probably the largest Grand Canyon painting Effie ever did. I'm going to jump ahead here to the women of that Effie started to connect with. Eleanor Boss Kate was one of these. She wanted to come live with Effie in 1932, I believe it was, the summer, and learn to paint. And she'd already been painting in Bisbee. She was from Bisbee. And she later went on to a career as a teacher in Guam, the Philippines, and Hawaii. And these are a couple examples of her art. I'm going to go through these rather quickly. Elizabeth Williams Ames, who later became mayor of Douglas, grew up around Douglas and studied with Effie when she was around 14 at the Hotel Gadsden, where Effie had a studio in the 1940s. And as you can see, Effie taught her technique. The one on the right is probably San Jose Peak and Little San Jose. And then there were some other women who were probably midlife when they started studying with Effie. The kids were gone or grown up, and their husbands were still working. Myram Tolles, who was from Bisbee, that's her sister Elsie, who became the first female superintendent of schools in Arizona. And she studied with Effie and definitely picked up a certain element of Effie's technique. Those are paintings over near Portal on the other side of the Chiricahua Mountains. Myrtle Fowler was another woman who lived in Douglas, and she was a traveler because her husband was doing a lot of travel for Phelps Dodge and the mining company and other businesses he was involved with. And this is some of her painting, which she was influenced by Japanese sumii painting. And these are a few more of her paintings, including those sycamore trees and even a saguaro. So that's probably not from Douglas. Jewel Crouch, her husband ran the Owl Drug Store, and Effie's father had been a pharmacist or druggist at one point in his life. And again, we see that Effie's technique was able to be embraced by Jewel, and she became one of the most prolific artists of Effie's students. Dozens and dozens of paintings, and even this is pastels on the left, and this beautiful screen, which I understand from people who were growing up in Douglas when Mrs. Crouch was still living there, that this was prominent in her living room. Georgina Cull, who was the wife of a banker in town and rancher, she studied with Effie. And again, we see that there is San Jose and Little San Jose, which Effie had just about all of her students paint for a sense of perspective and learning that. And then we see other paintings that she did of scenes. We don't know where all these are, but we see the yuccas and some aquatias. Now here's a Bisbee woman, Beatrice Kelly, which we sometimes hear her referred to as just B. Kelly, lived in Warren on Vista. And early photo of her there. We can see Effie's influence here. As it turned out, she didn't know Effie when she was early on painting, but she entered painting in the very first Cochise County Fair in 1921 and won first prize. And after that, she and Effie developed a friendship, many years apart, of course. But we see that B went on to do really fine work. And she studied with a very famous painter, Maynard Dixon, who taught her his style as well. And I think that shows up more here than Effie's style. Effie ended up living in the Gadsden Hotel starting in the early 1940s and was there teaching in the third floor back in the upper right-hand side there of the floor, the third floor. And she also was friendly with Catherine Kitt, who started the art department at the University of Arizona. And we see that Effie, around her 80th birthday in 1949, is being celebrated as quite the dean of Arizona women artists. It's hard to find anybody Earlier, we know that people like Sarah Lemon came through Arizona and painted botanicals. And of course, the many important native artists, including Nampayo, who were painting and doing artistic things. But as far as landscape painting and being a resident of Arizona, Effie seems to be the earliest. Here is a clipping from an art group that Effie had started, which later became the Douglas Art Association, which still exists today. This is Effie in front of the Gadsden Hotel in Douglas, probably towards the end of her time there. And eventually she ended up in the Arizona Pioneers Home as a resident there from 1951 to 55, and that's where she passed away. We didn't think she was painting there, but then turns out here's a 1952 painting from her that showed up in a collection of paintings that recently went to the Scottsdale Museum of the West, and they exhibited it in an exhibit of women's paintings at that museum over the last year or so. And this is where Effie is buried in Prescott, Arizona. There's a differentiation there. It's not the same date, 1868, 1869, but it's kind of one of those things that happens. One of our first exhibits that we did that I was involved with was in 2012 at the Douglas Art Association. And that's an old PD building, so still art in a mining town, in Smelter Town. This is what that exhibit looked like a little bit, and some ceramics there by Robert Hayostek. We exhibited in 2019, 150th birthday of Effie at the Tucson Desert Art Museum. We had 46 paintings, which at that time was the largest exhibit we'd ever had. In 2023, we went back to Arkansas, and this is in Nashville, Arkansas, in Effie's birthplace, and we did a small exhibit there. And over in Hope, this is the train station that Effie actually would have been at to leave for the West in 1894. It had been built in 1874 by the railroad when it first came through Hope, and they've turned it into this lovely little art center where we had a nice exhibit, small exhibit of Effie's key paintings. Most recently at the Desert Caballeros Western Museum in Wickenburg, we had a really big exhibit, our largest ever, probably more paintings by Effie than ever have been assembled, 57 paintings and some of her students. And also, we just had really a great crowd, thousands of people there. And thanks to Dr. Tricia Loescher for helping us get this exhibit together and have so many people see Effie's paintings. We also do some exhibits in small towns. This is in Wilcox, where we do occasional little exhibits like that of just a handful of paintings. And this was our last exhibit in Douglas at a new gallery, Studio 917 Gallery on G Avenue. And we were celebrating the Chiricahua and the Dragoon Mountains in Effie's paintings. This is some of the work that we do that's really important. Some of Effie's paintings have deteriorated largely because the old paints had a lot of lead in them. And of course, there are unfortunate accidents. This painting was not in any museum when that happened, and neither was this. But we were able to, in my case, I drove it to Chicago because you couldn't really ship those paintings, and we got them conserved there. And most recently, these at Cochise College, we were able to get those conserved as well and cleaned up and looking great. Those are from our Wickenburg exhibit. We have created a few books on Effie Anderson Smith's art, and this was our first one, Pictures from the Desert, and includes 17 pictures of Effie's paintings. And I want to thank our board secretary, Brian Ballard of Pierce, and also our longtime friend and supporter and work colleague of mine, Scott Barnaby in Philadelphia, who helped us put this book together. They really do more than help. They do the layout, they do the conception, the design, and I just provide the materials and write up a few things. And this book is on sale exclusively at the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum, Impressions of the Desert. It's the same name as our exhibit. And we'd love for you to have a copy. And I think that you're able to get that through the museum and maybe even on the website. The other two books are on our website, effieandersonsmith.org. And we'd like to thank all these wonderful organizations and people. And this is no way a complete list of the people who I owe many thanks to for helping us get to this point. But I'm just delighted to be able to do this presentation today and share with you that Effie Anderson Smith had dreams of being independent and also being a family person. And at some point in her life, she was able to achieve pretty much all of that. So Annie, I'll kick it back to you for questions and answers. Thank you very much.
And thank you so much, Stephen. And we do have questions. The first being, is the second house in Pierce still standing?
Yes, actually, we call that house number three because initially they lived in something and we don't have pictures of it. Then there was the one that we saw in different stages, and that's the one that burned down. And then the stucco, adobe and stucco house is there, and it's very easy to find if you get to Pierce, which is along Highway 191 between Wilcox and Douglas, Elfrida, those towns. You can drive into town. There's a couple of signs. One of them is a beautiful arch sign for the school, and you can drive right in there and into the center of town, and you will see a large school gymnasium off in a block or two away, and it's right next to that. The house is still there. It's still used by the Commonwealth Mine, or the company that calls itself the Commonwealth Silver and Gold Mine. There's not a lot of mining activity, but the engineers, when they are in town, use that, and it's not open as a museum at this point, but someday maybe.
And Mary asked, what is your favorite Effie painting?
Oh my goodness. How do you say that? Just ask me on a particular day, and it might be the painting that's in front of me. But of course, I have to love the Grand Canyon paintings. I have to say that, especially the one from 1928 to 35, which was the prototype, the large one. And also, it survived the fire. So, we've all had our fire moments in life, one way or the other, and the fact that has survived. I'm very partial to a painting called Autumn, which we saw earlier, that has two golden sycamore trees and Cochise Stronghold in the background. And then the other one I would say is the one with the ponderosa pines that indicates, red rocks in the middle of it. And that's up at the 8,000-foot level. I've been up there. It's gorgeous. So those are probably my three favorites. But some of these paintings that are deceptively simple, you need to live with them for a while, or you need to just go and sit and look at them for a while. And when you get into a room where there's more than one of them or several, you start to discover different things about them, and they talk to each other. So I've been fortunate over the last 15 years that as people wanted to gift paintings to me to hold for this museum project, which we're now doing, that I've gone through different phases of loving this one or that one. But there's one more called High Lonesome Road. So I guess I have multiple favorites. It's very hard to choose. It's like choosing children, isn't it? Yes. Choosing your favorite child. Yeah.
A very, very touching comment that I thought I'd read to you. Thank you for this opportunity. This is from Christine, by the way. Thank you for this opportunity to experience this elegant presentation. The art of Effie Anderson Smith has become a major portion of my life's inspiration.
Wow, Christine, thank you. You just made 15 years of work even more worth it when I hear that, because I felt that, I'd seen one or two paintings growing up in later years, owned them because they came to me through the family. But I had no idea until I started connecting with people like historian Cindy Hyostek and others who knew where these other paintings were. And then when we started to bring them together, the inspiration, they speak to you. If you love the desert, if you're from Arizona, or you love being in Arizona, anything connected with the desert, they speak to you, and it really is something very, very different. So, Christine, thank you so much for telling us that. We don't hear that. I think a lot of people feel that and think that, but we don't actually get to hear it. So, thank you for taking the time to write that.
And you had mentioned that Cindy had known where some of these works were. If our audience visits effieandersonsmith.org, they will find a section of the site that is devoted to the lost works. And would
Yes,
you touch on that for a moment, please?
sure. I realized that there were a few programs from Effie's exhibits around. As a matter of fact, Uncle Lewis, when he moved out of his house and my folks came to look after him in his later years after Aunt Claire had died, there was a drawer in the house that was just, everybody's got their jumble drawers. Sometimes it's tools or whatever. There was a drawer all full of newspaper clippings and art programs and things. And I think it had just been a box that he'd moved many times that had been dumped in this drawer. And my mother went through, who's an artist herself, and organized things and realized, oh my gosh, there's things here that we should know about. So I started to look at those programs, and there's only a couple, but some of the newspaper articles about her exhibits. and reviews had lists of paintings. And so I started creating a spreadsheet on that. Then that's worked into the catalog raisonné, which we haven't really published yet because we don't know. There's hundreds, maybe thousands of paintings out there yet. And we're still trying to get that all together. But the list of all that information is coming together as part of what we do. And now I've lost what the question was. Let me go back to you, Annie, and restate it for me so I'd be sure I answer it.
I had asked if you could just tell our audience about the lost works.
Yes. So from one
Effie.
of those paintings, from one of those programs, I realized, okay, there's paintings here we've never seen before. And some of these titles we see again and again. But were these paintings actually paintings that survived the fire? Yes, because in the programs that we have, usually it's from after the fire. And over time, people have started to come forward and say, I think I have one of these paintings. And usually the tip off is that there's a number on the back, which some artists will number their paintings that are in an exhibit that relates to the program, the paper program that's handed out if they have one. So if you will see on our website, there are a number on that page of the website, and it'll have the word found. So we've actually found those paintings. Some of them are in our collection. Some of them are in the private collections of people that we know, but there's still quite a few more out there, including New Mexico paintings. There's at least a couple of New Mexico paintings that were in her 1931 exhibit, and again in her Arizona Inn exhibit in 1932 and 38. And so there's a lot of paintings out there yet that are lost. The one that is the most intriguing to me is the one that she painted on the Wilcox Playa, which is a dry lake bed, and she painted mirages at high noon with no shadows. And what does that painting look like? It was talked about in most of her early exhibits, and it's nowhere to be found. Nobody can tell you where that is.
My word. And this question goes along with perhaps identifying a lost work. Is on your website, do you list all the ways that Effie signed her paintings? And
Yeah, more or less, it might not be a specific page of that, but if you look at the paintings page, I believe there's some signature examples on there. And if you think you might have one, just email us at info@effieandersonsmith.org, and I can help you determine that. But usually she signed E.A. Smith, no dots by the E and A. I mean, she did that consistently through her life. It's only a couple of times where we see this EAS, like the painting in Oregon, right in Oregon, that looks like it might be a New Mexico painting. And her very first painting, she spelled out her name, Effie Anderson. But almost everything from her Arizona years would be E.A. Smith, and then sometimes she would add the initials of her husband, A.Y., because he facilitated a lot of her art studies. And she will usually just have a 2-year date, and so 28 or something like that. And the E looks like a backwards 3.
interesting. And did Effie stretch her own canvases and mix and produce her own paints? Are you aware?
I can't tell you about stretching her own canvases. That's possible. She was in Pierce, which for a long time was not on the rail line. The closest place would be Wilcox, and I'm not sure it was a place where you would buy art supplies. You'd have to go to Tucson. And she bought a long time from Posner's in Tucson. Posner's is still there, different people running it, of course. But we do know that she bought a lot of supplies from LA, and before that, probably from El Paso. And we do know that a lot of the frames that are on her paintings are from the Kanst Gallery, Kanst, which is a historically important gallery and art sales place and frame maker in Los Angeles. As far as her paints, we have a lot of evidence that she was not buying commercial paints like in tubes, that she would do what a lot of artists did. You buy the pigment, the powder, you mix it with oil, you put it on a glass or some type of grinding uh, implement, and then you get it to the consistency you want. And then if you're going to go out and paint plein air, you're going to have metal tubes, like a tube of toothpaste. It's open at the end. The cap is on the one side, but at the end, instead of being crimped, it's open. And then you force the paint into that tube with a palette knife or something like that. And then when you've got it full enough with your colors, then you're going to crimp the tube and take that out with you. So it's kind of neat. You really can't be out there mixing paints or stuff like that. You might be able to put some things on a palette before you go out. It's probably going to get dirty. And um, you definitely want to be prepared with what you need when you go out to do plein air painting. So I'm sure there's others. Everybody has their own technique. I am not a painter, so I can only tell you what I've learned, but it's clear that she was mixing her own paints. And because in one of the moves, we found a bunch of old tubes. And of course, at the time, I didn't know what they were and they got trashed, but I'm pretty sure those were hers. So that's a shame, but shame on me. But yes, so there's evidence of that, and also the fact that you might get a bad batch of paint every once in a while, or mix a color not quite right, and unfortunately, you're not going to find out for about 30 or 40 years when it all cracks and starts coming off. And the lighter colors in the sky, which have a lot of lead in them, are the ones that tends to happen with. And we have had some paintings where 20% of the paint was missing, but that's not common. It's usually they hold up pretty well. But yeah, I think she was doing all of that the old-fashioned way, the way artists have been doing for hundreds of years before her.
And Catherine says, discovering a box labeled A.Y. Smith began a wonderful journey meeting you, Stephen, and learning about Effie's and her family's connection. And she enjoys the Effiegrams very much. And so that is a prime opportunity to let people know how they can sign up for your organization's newsletter.
Sure. At the bottom of every web page on our website at effieandersonsmith.org or .com, there is a sign up place. And also, if you happen to be a user of Substack, the blog that's out there where all kinds of very interesting writers are putting out their work, you can also sign up for Effiegram on there. But our website might be the easiest place to find it. It's a little block at the bottom of the page, and all you have to do is enter your email address, and boom, you're subscribed, and you'll be receiving them. They come out about once a month, and we just sent a couple out recently. So get in there, and if you want to see all the past issues on Substack, you can just enter Effiegram, and I think you'll be able to find the archive of all past issues.
Fantastic. And if you don't mind, I'm going to stop your share since people
Yes.
have had ample opportunity to write down the website, and I'm going to ask you to start your video there. And in the
Yes.
meantime, could you describe a bit about how you are preserving Effie's paintings?
Sure. When we find the paintings, and let me just, the meeting is being recorded. So, okay, yes, I'm giving my permission at the end of this. Uh, we have been collecting these paintings, and typically we display them in other museums at this point because we are still seeking our permanent home. But we've worked with several art conservators, one in Phoenix. I don't think she'll mind if I give her a shout out, Dr. Gay Kingsley, who has conserved quite a number of paintings. We've had others when I was living more in Northern California. We've taken paintings to Chicago, and then I've been working for a long time with Betty Engel in San Diego. Not all of these conservators hang a shingle out in our public because they can only handle so much work. Most of them are one-person shop. We used someone in Santa Monica recently who had quite a studio of other people working on things, but I think it takes a certain understanding to work on what essentially are early 20th centuries paintings. And before, with the older materials, it's not acrylics. People use acrylics today to a great extent and are happy to use them because they dry pretty quickly. And if you want to go back and work on it the next day, it's not mushy. Whereas these old kind of oil paints, it takes a little bit of extra knowledge to work in that. Effie used to say that the painting that she would sell or give to somebody, that they should let it hang for a year and then get it varnished, and almost nobody did. And she didn't do it because she was kind of diddling with them still until she would sell them. But it takes almost 20 years for an oil painting to completely dry. And so you definitely want to, when you start to work on a painting that's older like that, you would think that it's completely dry, but there are always solubility issues with all kinds of material that was mixed by an individual. So usually the art conservators will do some testing different places. We've had a couple of cases where we don't know what Effie was signing them with. It might not have been paint, and it could have been some kind of ink, and the signature starts to come off after you've already tested around. So it's good to have somebody working on these who worked with other paintings by Effie, and to know exactly what to expect. And now that I'm a little more knowledgeable about it, having worked with so many of them, I can kind of give a new conservator an idea. But yeah, it's really a process. And if you are owning an Effie Anderson Smith painting or any other historic painting, and you want to find somebody in Arizona or California, I mean, I can help you connect. But certainly, if you have an Effie Anderson Smith painting, we now have a lot of knowledge about how to take care of those, how to get them cleaned. Because very often, if somebody in your family or somebody else had it and there was cigarette smoking around, or pipe, or cigar, or you live near a smelter, or anything like that, is going to have a layer of grunge on it that you will be amazed after it's been surface cleaned how much better it will look.
And beyond her works of art, do you have any letters or diaries or other types of document that convey how she felt about moving from lush Arkansas to to the desert environment?
There's knowledge in the family from cousin Phyllis, who's now in Michigan, a former Arizonan, that she was a bit of a letter writer, and we see correspondence between her and other people, but it's sporadic because whatever she had up until 1929 burned up in the house, and then she was I don't know what happened to the rest of the things. My uncle Lewis was married twice, and you move many times, and things kind of get trashed or something, and maybe they didn't think it was that important. But we've had other people who had contact with her, either give us copies of letters. She had quite a correspondence with Isabella Greenway, who opened the Arizona Inn in the 1930s and was Arizona's first congresswoman. And we get some insights and tidbits from some of those, but we don't see her writing too much about Arkansas, except occasionally just some little mention of, oh, my father used to subscribe to the Congressional Digest, and she wrote to Isabella Greenway, who was from Kentucky originally, or some things like that, but not a lot of insights about her Arkansas life, unfortunately. We'd love to know more about it. I mentioned in the talk that she didn't talk too much about her life in Arkansas, but she certainly gathered around her and socialized with all kinds of people from the South, and especially Arkansas in Arizona. When I go down the list of names, I see Arkansan. That was very common, and they certainly she was in touch with all kinds of people from her home area, but we just don't have written evidence of it. Yeah, hopefully it will come up, because sometimes people don't know what they have, and that very often happens. Letters turn up, from time to time, and we're always glad to see them.
Well, Stephen, thank you so much for giving us an opportunity to learn more about Effie Anderson Smith. It has just been a delightful program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thanks to you and the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum for recognizing that Effie Anderson Smith was important to the history of the area and worth exhibiting, and for an entire year. Thank you very much, Annie.
Oh, but of course. And as a reminder, if you would like to experience the work of Effie Anderson Smith in person, we currently have an exhibit of her work at the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum, Impressions of the Desert, The Art of Effie Anderson Smith. And that will be on exhibit until about the first week of January. We're kind of loose on the end date at this point. So thank you again, Stephen, and thank you to our audience. We hope to see you again online in the near future.
Thanks,
Take care,
everybody.
everyone.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye.